the needs, the demands, the visions for the future of the European LT community. And by LT community, I mean, of course, you, the people in this room, everybody in the speech and text processing business in Europe, but also people in the wider disciplines of NLP and LT, people working in the broader field of AI and in the social sciences and humanities. And these are the people who we considered as LT developers and researchers. And we needed to consult them in order to develop the strategic research and innovation agenda. The instruments we have used is a survey common to all the targeted participants and some focused interviews that have been conducted by members of the large ELE consortium. We mainly targeted members of the participating networks, CLARIN, CLAIR, ELG of course, the MetaNet network, and representatives of the European LT industry, members of the LT Innovation Association. Everybody shared their views in this process, and this consolidated feedback is depicted in several deliverables. I will only give you a brief presentation about the profiles of the respondents, of the people whom we have consulted with. And I will then give the floor to my colleagues from CLARIN and CLAIR to share with you their main findings from the feedback they collected from their own networks. So in total, we have collected more than 300 responses to the ELE survey for the LT developers. And these represent more than 200 different organizations. Three-quarters of these organizations are mainly academic and research institutions, while the rest represent the industry. Geographically, they are distributed in all 24 EU member states, but they also come from other affiliated countries, Switzerland, Serbia, Norway, Iceland, and the UK. And they stated that they are active in almost all LT fields, from developing basic NLP components to data marketplaces, data distribution, conversational systems, and so on. As I said, all this feedback is analyzed in 6 different reports, one per network that we have consulted with, plus 2.17, which is a summary of the consolidated feedback from everyone, from all stakeholders. And you can find all these deliverables on our website. But now I'd like to give the floor to Maria Eskiewicz from CLARIN, who will analyze the findings from the CLARIN network.
Thank you, Maria. Well, I have quick 5 minutes, so I proceed to the slides. Just to give you an introduction, yes, we have sent the survey to our network and from the point of view of language technology developers, but even our developers sometimes are the users, and also CLARIN is the research infrastructure for language as social and cultural data. We are actively doing the outreach and contacting different communities in social sciences and humanities. So this is why our findings on the current situation are not only from the technology point of view, but also from the user needs point of view. And what we see in the responses that on the one hand, there is some positive notes. So if the researchers are working with most of the official European languages and they want to focus on the written standard language forms, they have access to some basic resources, models, and tools. However, of course, once you start to think of working with some non-standard varieties, spoken versions of the language, and then you have way scarce amount of possibilities to find needed resources and services. From the point of view of technology development, of course, it also depends what is that you want to work with, because depending on the size of the language in terms of number of speakers, GDP of the country, so there might be more or less things available, depending on the domain that you want to focus with, whether it's a popular thing and the domain that can potentially also be interesting for the industry. You might have better selection, while if you are in the more niche and not more particular digital humanities aspects, you again have issues. And the third dimension here is the diachronic perspective. So if you work with the current versions of the language, you have more access to different language models and tools, while if you want to have some historical perspective on the language, then you have, again, more troubles. In terms of the situation, I mean, also on the positive side, saying something good, we have certain offers and efforts that are done by research infrastructures to help the community. So we try to maximize the training and reuse potential of the tools and services that we have, and in multiple languages. So for that, for example, CLARIN has the initiative that is called Resource Families, and these are the collections of different corporate tools that are user-friendly collections that allow different researchers from different backgrounds to work on the same type of data, and that encourage cross-lingual and transnational research. Even though the education is not our primary goal as research infrastructure, but we support the development and training of the digital skills, because we think that's the important backbone of development of the technologies and the use of the technologies. And we look into ways how the resources can be, and tools and services can be integrated in the curricula, so that larger audience are aware of what is already on offer and can use it. And also with other research infrastructure, DARIA, we enable knowledge exchange and research mobility, so by providing information about all digital humanity courses that are to be found within Europe. In terms of predictions for the future and recommendations that were expressed in our network, essentially there are three dimensions that we can structure. That's the scientific development. So I think it was said already many times yesterday and today that there is a need and there is a clear path that there should be shift from text to more speech processing. In terms of translation technologies, there should be more dynamic adaptation and more use of general and cultural specific knowledge. And in general, the natural language understanding that has to be not a set of particular tasks that are probably successfully carried out by one or the other tool, but are more of the concise product and concise research output. For the dimension of legal and administrative support, it's important that it happens at the EU and also at research infrastructures level, because there are different national roadmaps, but there should be more coordination in the implementation of those. And there should be certain IPR regulation flexibility that would help the users. And the third axe for the predictions is and recommendations is that we need to pay more attention for the human resources, and so to support the researchers at all stages of their career. And those predictions, of course, they come with the challenges that can be aligned on the same axis. So for the technology development, we need to think about aligning all the standards across different fields and across different domains. So we need to increase more the visibility and findability of resources. At the same time, we also have to think about the footprint of language technology, because I don't think that it was addressed a lot yet, but this is growing problem, and the discussion about that should be happening. From the point of view of legal aspects and administrative support, there should be more clear guidelines as to the application of the GDPR, especially for the cross-country collaborations. That's a big question, because it might be that researchers in different countries have different regulations to follow. On the level of the administrative and funding support, there should be also appreciation and reward for publication in local languages. So it's not only working with local languages, but also giving a bit more prestige and appreciation and when the work is reported for the community in the language of the countries. And the third aspect here is that we need to appreciate and also look into into the research that should be reproducible, and the trustworthiness of the outcomes should be part of the workflow, so that it's a part of the evaluation procedures. And the last item is the human resources and education. So we need to have a supporting scientific environment and appropriate funding. And also an additional note that we talk a lot about deployment, about implementation of the technology, but we have to remember that there should be some funding allocated to the fundamental research, because this is what allows further big breakthroughs when we the researchers just think in general, what if and what could be done in 50 years, or if I had all the data in the world. Okay, and that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria, for managing 7 minutes. And now we will have Marlies Thonissen from the CLARIN network with us online, who will present the feedback collected from the CLARIN network. Hi, Marlies.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you okay. You can start.
Perfect. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm speaking on behalf of the Confederation of Laboratories for Artificial Intelligence Research in Europe, short CLAIR, and I will quickly summarize some of the key results from the LT Developers Survey. So on the slide, you can see the evaluation of the current situation, where the participants were asked to rate their level of agreement with some statements. So I divided them into 5 parts. On the left-hand side, you can see research and technology. For the statement that there is still a need for basic research, we had the highest level of agreement with over 90%. Also belonging to this area is the lack of coordination and missing links between research and industry. If we look at the area of data, it was stated that there is a lack of publicly available high-quality resources. And from the interviews, we also learned that there is a need for research on how to do more with less data. If we look at the market, we had the 3rd highest agreement, with almost 80% of the participants agreeing that there is a strong competition with big non-European companies and market disruption by global players, and insufficient markets to justify investments in language technologies for smaller languages. In terms of innovation, one of the main challenges that the participants indicated was that there is a strong fragmentation of the European LT industry, and that there is a brain drain happening in Europe. As we have heard previously, also here we have legal and organizational matters that are considered a challenge. For example, 3/4 of all answers from the participants agreed that there is an inadequate recognition of the importance of multilinguality in Europe and insufficient public procurement. If we go to the next slide, we can have a look at the predictions for the future and recommendations. Here, the participants were asked to indicate how effective they consider some of the policies and instruments to speed up the development and deployment of language technology in Europe, equally for all languages. Again, here we have the 5 key results for the instruments. I also added some visuals for you to see how the participants rated and thought how effective these instruments were. So on the left side, under 1, we can see that the large-scale and long-term funding program has a very strong support, with over half of the participants indicating that they consider this measure very effective, and overall more than 90% of agreement. Then we have the continuous investment in research infrastructures for language technology. Again, 95% of agreements and no one indicating that they think this would be not effective at all. On the right-hand side, under 3, we can see that the measure of investment in development of new methodologies for transfer and adaptation of resources and technologies to other domains and languages has also very strong support with 94% of agreement. With 4, we have the increased availability of qualified personnel on LT and incentives for talent retention that was seen as a very effective instrument to speed up the development and deployment of language technology in Europe. And last but not least, the reinforcement of training and education initiatives with 94% of agreement. So overall, we can see for all these 5, there's a very strong support, and these measures are considered very effective. If we now jump to my last slide, I would like to put all of these results a little bit into a broader context, because CLAR is not only representing language technology, but all areas of AI. And we have seen some of the results from the survey, from the LT survey, also for other areas of AI. So we see the main challenges in the complex and highly fragmented nature of the AI ecosystem, that there is a lack of effective funding instruments for stimulating research and innovation, and that there's also a lack of strategic EU-level activities to attract global attention or to generate global impact, and that there is a lack of coordination between different activities to reach larger goals. So what CLAR recommends is the collection, sharing, and development of more language resources, data sets, and methods to maintain Europe's diversity on a cultural and economic level, to make attractive offers for top researchers in Europe to prevent the brain drain, and to unite forces, optimally use existing resources, sustainably promote and finance future resources, and last but not least, but very important, that action must be taken immediately to prevent Europe from falling behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlies. Thank you, Marlies, for being with us. So we will move on to a different session now. You need to change the slide deck.
Thank you very much, Maria, once again, and to the speakers. Now, after the developers of language technologies, we are moving on to the users of language technologies. And this presentation will be given by Natalia Resende from Dublin City University, who will hopefully join us online right now.
Yeah.
Natalia, hi.
Presentation. Hi. So, can I start? Can I start? Okay, thanks everyone for coming here today. So I will be talking about the demands and needs and gaps of language technologies. So first, for us to understand the demands, needs, and gaps in terms of language technology support across European languages, we carried out a survey within the community of language technology users in order to explore from the perspective of the users how digital language equality can be promoted and achieved by 2030. So next slide. So this survey, it was disseminated through 6 European initiatives, namely by ECSPM, European Civil Society for Multilingualism, the European Federation of National Institutions for Language, FNIL, the European Language Equality Network, ALAN, and the Association of European Research Libraries, LIBER, and New European Media, NEM, as well as by Wikipedia. So these initiatives collected answers, and they also prepared reports, 6 reports. These reports, they show the analysis and interpretation of the results, And also these European initiatives, they also carried out interviews, and these interviews were conducted with key representatives of language technology users in order to collect further information and also to clarify any information collected through the surveys. So next slide, please. So the LT survey received contributions from a diverse group of stakeholders, for example, independent contractors, consultants, also contributions from SMEs, large enterprises, and government unities. But as we can see from the chart, more than 50% of the responses came from the education and research sectors. So then, next slide, please. Next, please. The next one. So contributions to the survey, they came from all over Europe. So many contributions came from Croatia due to the dissemination of the survey at a conference held in Croatia. And some responses came from people also based outside Europe, like, for example, USA, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Russian Federation. So next, please. So as we can see here, more than 74% of respondents, they work with English language. This language is followed by a well-balanced group of language composed by German, French, and Spanish languages. So these results indicate that most respondents, they work with these languages rather than other European languages. So then next, please. So regarding the questions of the questionnaire, so when respondents, they were asked to evaluate the level of language technology support per language based on a 4-point Likert scale, the results show that English has an excellent support with a score of 3.6. German, French, and Spanish are also considered well-supported languages with a score between 2.5 and 3. While all the other languages, they are considered having poor support with scores ranging from 1.2 to 2.2, and or very poor support with scores ranging from 0.8 to 1. So next. So in relation to the predictions and visions for the future, we can see that most of the respondents, 82%, either strongly agree or agree that there will be a wider range of language tools for European languages. 68% agree or strongly agree that in the next 10 years there will be higher quality tools for European languages, including minority languages or lesser used languages. And they also think that the language technologies can help to prevent linguistic loss. So as you can see, these results show that users are optimistic in relation to the availability of language technology tools and the improvements in the performance of tools, especially for smaller languages. So next. So respondents, they also had the chance to point out the tools that they want to see in the future that are not currently available for the language that they work with. So, so they express their opinion through open-ended questions, and the results show a high demand for better quality tools, such as, for example, we have respondents saying that respondents saying that they wish better parsing for Danish than currently available. Other examples are, for example, speech recognition for Welsh, speech recognition for Catalan, or better grammar checking for Catalan. So both higher quality tools and more available tools for certain languages are current in demand by LT users. So in addition to the survey, the language technology survey disseminated through the European initiatives, we also collected responses from EU citizens through the EU Citizen Survey. In this survey, the main objective of the survey was to take into account the opinions, individual needs, and wishes and general demands of the European citizens. So it was a short survey with only 12 questions, and this survey was disseminated in 28 countries. So it was translated into 35 languages and covered a total of 86 European languages. The survey was disseminated through Lucid Market Services as well as via ELE Consortium. So we collected a total of 21,455 complete responses, but today I will be presenting the preliminary results only with 10,330 responses analyzed so far. So first, as we can see, most of the respondents belonged to the 25-34 age group or 35 to 44 age group. And most of them were completed high school or hold a bachelor's degree. And in relation to the questions, next slide, please. We also asked respondents before starting the question to select the words and terms that they are familiar with in the field of language technologies. And also or the terms that they are able to understand right away. So for this data set, for this part of the data set, we can see that machine translation was the most selected term, followed by chatbot and smart personal assistants. It seems that conversational agents or the term like language-centric artificial intelligence is not very well known among respondents. So next slide, please. So, and also the results show that English is the most used language. And also this English is followed by French, German, Spanish, and Italian. So then this confirmed what has been found in the previous survey. So probably English is here the predominant language because we observed that respondents use English in addition to their mother tongue, probably professionally. So also, next slide, please. So now, the preliminary results also show that search tools are the most used tools among respondents, as well as language learning tools and automatic subtitling tools, for example, for YouTube. And all the other tools, they are less used. But of course, that these results can change once we have the full analysis. But so far, search tools are the most used tools. Next slide, please. And we also asked respondents to evaluate the performance of 8 tools that they use with language that apply to them. So we can see here in the slides the 8 tools that we asked respondents to evaluate. And then for this analysis, actually, we are only presenting the results for EU official languages. And then we can see from the average scores that the best evaluated tools are for English, German, French, Italian, and Spanish with the same score, a score of 3.6. For other languages, the average scores are lower. And we can also see from the slides that, for example, Irish and Maltese the scores are very low indicating that the language technology tools for these languages do not work as well as for the other EU languages. So the next, please. We also wanted to know how the EU citizens interpret advantages of using language technologies. So they were requested to select the top 3 advantages in their opinion. And the results of this first round of the analysis show that most of the respondents think that language technologies are important to improve communication between speakers of different languages, and also because they can promote people's exposure to minority or regional languages, and also increase the number of speakers of those languages, right, including minority regional languages. So to conclude, so both surveys show that English is very well supported language, followed by German, French, Spanish, and Italian. It also shows a concern of the users in relation to the differences in technological support between European languages, specifically for the poor technological support of minority, regional, or lesser used languages. The survey also shows that these differences in support are mainly reflected in differences in the quality or performance of the tools between the languages. In addition, both surveys show that users are aware of the importance of the language technologies, not only for communication between people of different languages, but also for increasing the number of speakers of smaller languages, and also shows that language technologies are important for the preservation of language as a cultural heritage. So that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Natalia, for giving us a glimpse at the, it's a moving target. We are still analyzing the results of this big European citizen survey. I think this is never done before, collecting almost 25,000 different responses. This is a huge task, as you can imagine, and Natalia is progressing well with the analysis of this. Right, this session now is being concluded with a panel discussion, which will be shared by Teresa Lin, and she will take over. I will give the slide to the screen. Right, Teresa,
Okay.
the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Georg. What I'm going to talk about now are the deep dives. So we had some deep dive reports written for the ELE project. And the deep dives, as it said on the tin, is a deep dive, is a further in-depth analysis of how industry is impacted and the views of those who work in the industry, in the language technology industry. And so these people are on the front line, if you like. So we can talk about research forever. We can talk about building resources, but what actually happens when it comes to being on the front line and dealing with customers and demands, and how exactly do these systems work and what are their limitations. So there are 4 deep dives, and we have 4 people joining us here, 3 on stage, and hopefully we have Martin. Come in, Austria. Thanks for joining us, Martin. So we have Martin Kastelbach from Semantic Web Company. So Martin was the lead on the data, language resources, and knowledge graphs deep dive. We have Gerhard Backfried from Hensoldt, and he led the deep dive document on speech technologies. Andres Silva Garcia from Expert AI, who was one of the leads on the text analytics and NLU, as in natural language understanding deep dive, and Andres Vasiljev, sorry, Andres Vasiljev, I'll say, from Tilda. I apologize, you can correct me in a second. Where he worked on the machine translation deep dive. So the deep dive documents had the same structure, if you like, and that of describing the current state of the art, the main gaps that are out there, the contribution to the digital language equality, and of course impact on society, main breakthroughs needed, and the visions and development goals. So what we're going to talk about today are the main gaps. And what I want to do, first of all, is highlight that it's not just these 4 people today who contributed to these. It was actually a consortium of industry partners with some input from academic institutions as well. And we'll cover 2 main themes in this discussion. And so the questions I posed to the guys during the week were, what were your main findings in your deep dive in terms of shortcomings and gaps? And number 2, so we'll try and structure this into maybe 2 halves. And number 2, how do you see these issues impacting EU societies if they are not addressed? So I'm going to start with Martin. Martin, you can hear us okay?
Good.
Yeah?
Hi there.
And I think I can hear you okay. So Martin, I'm going to start with a quote from the Data Deep Dive. I'm quoting you. The Data Deep Dive, this document is a kind of enabler or a basis for the other 3 deep dives as it builds the backbone of those technologies and solutions. And so maybe you could elaborate on how important, we've heard it over the last day and a half of how important data is, but in particular some of the impacts in terms of equality and the challenges faced there. And in particular, if you could talk about the data spaces, why the current repositories wouldn't be enough and how important this announcement of the European data spaces would impact.
For sure. Thank you very much, Therese. Hello to the colleagues. Warm regards from Vienna and thanks for the invitation. So this is Martin speaking from Semantic Web Company. Yeah, I think it's no doubt to speak about the importance of data that is needed for language technology and Europe language equality. It's relatively clear where we are at the moment. We also heard before there's a bunch of data available, but most of it is in English or the big languages. So what we have is a very clear lack of data and inequality of availability and accessibility across different EU languages and even beyond, because in Europe there are also additional languages spoken. So that's a very important thing. One recommendation in the deep dive was also to set up something like an action program here to really identify what kind of data and which quality data we need and really make this available and accessible across the EU languages. And you also mentioned it, there are a lot of repositories in place, and you mentioned data spaces. So we fully support here, and interesting wise, when we have been drafting the deep dive, it was announced, I think it was in February or March, that there will be in the EU Digital Europe program a common European language data space. So I think the idea here is really that you say you have a single source of truth or something, or a single source of access, maybe is the better word, and that there is easy to use data available, there is a broad variety of data available, and you can really use the value that is lying in the data. What does it mean? We heard about that also before, and people are aware. This is that data spaces integrate data and give an easy access using standards, but also, for example, using FAIR principles, so findability, accessibility, interoperability, and enable reuse. And for interoperability, but also for the other, let's say, attributes of the FAIR principles, we need standards. And regarding these standards, this is something we have to apply and to make use of in the data spaces, in the European data spaces. By the way, this is a very strong movement. It's not only in language resources, it's really all across a lot of industries. Thereby also other data spaces can make a lot of use and benefit from a common European language data space, because language is also an enabler for other industries and for interoperability. What brings us to another finding, a specific one, which kind of data we need. To really make powerful applications and solutions, we need domain-specific data, domain-specific vocabularies. We need that monolingual, bilingual, multilingual. These days, often we speak about knowledge graphs. That would even be a step forward, so interlinked data that can be used. But imagine you want to make an application in the field of health or in the or pharma, then there is a language used and a terminology used that is changing quickly. And if you want to make powerful solutions for the European language room in all the languages, so then you need really to make available such domain-specific vocabularies in the different languages to make use of it and to build powerful solutions. Nevertheless, there's also another attribute or a finding, I would call it data literacy. So really to make the best out of the data, to bring the value of the data, we need better data management skills within industry and public administration that needs to be tackled already at a very low education level and goes up through all levels of educations. And finally, one more thing is we need for a set and a framework of regulations and policies. There's a lot already in place, useful, but also something we have to discuss if we can work with that or if it's a barrier or a blocker. For example, we have the trustworthy AI regulation or the ethics in AI in place, but mainly we have also the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in place. We heard that also before, that across the different languages, across the different countries can become a blocker regarding making powerful use of the data. And with this, I hand over back to you, Teresa, and the panel.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Martin. I'm glad you brought up GDPR because I actually have a quote here from the MT Deep Dive. The EU coordinated plan on artificial intelligence correctly states that further developments in AI require a well-functioning data ecosystem built on trust, data availability, and infrastructure. But it underestimates the effect that one of its cornerstones has had on data collection in the field. Unfortunately, GDPR has had an adverse effect on large part of the European LT industry. Andrej, I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that and how exactly it has impacted on the LT industry from a machine translation perspective, at least.
Yeah. For machine translation, of course, as many other LT areas, availability of large amounts of quality data is dispensable for driving quality and scope of application of machine translation. And currently we do have quite large data collections provided by European institutions like DGT, Corpora, and some other data sources, but still they are limited only to certain domains, certain application areas. And so we do have quite a good coverage of MT systems that do a good job for legal translation, for technical translation, but even not in all the technical fields. But there are many subdomains where translation quality is by far not sufficient. And for example, one area is health. Machine translation could be very useful and valuable, but availability of data is very much restricted by GDPR restrictions. Other area, the legal restrictions hindering development of MT is application of MT in more colloquial language, for more freestyle language. And here, a translation of literary work, of fiction, could be very helpful to drive MT development. And here we do see disparity. In US, there's a fair use principle in application of data. In Europe, we do have much restricted copyright applications, so we cannot use translations of literary works for developing MT systems.
And I see, Gerhard, you're nodding your head here. I know in the speech deep dive, you've mentioned that the copyright laws being much stricter here in Europe means that the same data is not available to you as it would be to US researchers.
Are we sharing this one? Yeah. This one? Okay, great. Absolutely right also. Especially, and I think this is a theme we've heard many times, the lack of data, the disadvantage that we're at in Europe. Partly, of course, we're working to create our own data sets. Partly, we're relying on data sets that we obtain from the ELG, for example, or other sources. But if I may, I would also like to point out one thing, because the industry has not been mentioned so much here. And if it has been mentioned, it was always, let's say, slightly negatively, because we're only in for the money. But eventually that's true, of course. We're in for the money, but this is not necessarily a bad thing. And we're talking about digital language equality or putting languages on the same level. I would say from the industry perspective, it depends very much on the use case. And one phrase that I use with our customers is, it doesn't have to be perfect to make perfect sense. Because even if I may support Basque only at a very rudimentary level, or Welsh, or Galician, or whichever of the lesser resource languages, it's still much better for the customer than having no support at all. And it may be the first stepping stone into an organization. And then you upsell, and then you improve, and then you increase that. So I think when we talk about quality and putting things on the same level, I'm fully with the goal in principle, but it shouldn't keep us from using smaller things as first stepping stones into the different industries, into the health industry, into the legal industry, into different languages. And I had to smile a little bit because I think sometimes I need a machine translation system, medical German to my German, because I don't understand the doctors. So maybe even language to language would work, different registers.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, Martin had also touched on this issue of having data in specific domains. And from the text analytics and NLU perspective, in your industry, Andres, what have you come up against in terms of finding that type of data?
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, in fact, in our deep dive, we found that usually when we go to the clients and to the customers and propose a text analytics project based on neural models and things that we're using right now, they had heard about the potential of the technology, but they don't know what they need. And what they need is actually data. Specific, not only domain data, but industry data, and also for the task at hand. And they don't have that. And sometimes they haven't planned to produce that data. So that's the first burden that we find when we face this kind of projects. In addition, so we had to teach them or leading them how to prepare this data, but also with quality. And quality is a very important feature here, because at the end, the whole success of the project depends on the quality of the data set. And by quality, we mean agreement in the annotations of the data, and also avoiding bias and avoiding also misinformation or toxic information in this kind of data.
And also, we were speaking at the break earlier on about the issue sometimes you might come up against with some clients is this trust in the system. So there's, you know, data-driven systems, deep learning especially, is now considered like a black box because we can't actually see what's going on. Do you have any insight into that from the industry perspective?
Yes, well, that's a very important issue because for some customers, it's very important to see what is happening inside in the model that is doing a prediction. They want to know, they want to see the reasoning steps. And with these neural models, it's almost impossible. We know that there is a research undergoing and some insights have been extracted from the way that they work. But the truth is that right now we don't know. And that's an important thing that we're finding. And in addition to that, until not so far ago, most of the systems that had been deployed in real use cases were symbolic systems. So there are plenty of symbolic systems already in the different industries running. And we think that is very important to find like the intersection point between this existing and robust technology that has been used for many, many years and the new technology that is emerging right now.
Okay, yeah, true. Gerhard, to interrupt.
And if I may add, we also had this during the break. What we produce very often is not the end, but it's the beginning of a customer journey. And we often hear end users wanting to adjust, model their own domain, add things, which is sometimes not that easy. Of course, we can try and make it as easy as possible and put some sanity checks in there, but there's quite a demand. And then the question is, we introduce technology, but we don't introduce it into a void, we introduce it into a culture, into a living thing. The skill set of the people the structure of the organization, it has an impact, and there's no free lunch, I'm afraid. It doesn't happen automatically. So managing the expectations also on what is possible. We had this chat and said sometimes people come and have science fiction expectations. That's where they get it. They get it from science fiction movies, seriously. So keeping the expectations realistic and holding people's hands, this is also part of consulting. This is also part, I think, of a good chance for even smaller companies to get to grips with the business.
Yeah, if I may add, we introduced the notion in our deep dive of MT literacy. And we feel that it's very important for successful, efficient application of language technologies in general and MT in particular to drive the right expectations, right understanding how to use this powerful tool, and how much benefit it can provide for e-commerce, for companies to make their website multilingual or to make their product to speak in their customer language, to analyze feedback coming from customers, but at the same time understanding that MT is not ready for publishing quality.
Has limitations.
Translation, yeah, it should be verified, validated by humans, and this is about, again, driving
it's not the machine that is
and
at fault.
applying these tools in the right way.
Exactly, yeah. In the context of these large models, large data and so on, we heard yesterday a lot about discussion about computing power, and that in Europe we don't have the same computing power and it's assessed as a disadvantage. So I want to talk about that from two perspectives. So how does that affect you guys in your industries? And on the flip side, as Maria mentioned earlier on, should we be concerned more about the carbon footprint of these data servers and potentially look at other avenues rather than just feeding it more data? Should we be trying to look at different architectures on how to design these systems so that we don't need so much data and computing power? So it's sort of two angles. So we can let maybe, do you want to keep going, maybe Anders, and we'll come back?
In our field, this training large machine translation systems from huge amounts of data, it requires a lot of computing power, and especially if you're wanting to work in the area of multilingual models, to create models that encompass many languages and can translate in all the different directions, you need tremendous computing power, and smaller companies do not have such access to such hardware devices, and there's a big disparity. For global companies can train their multilingual models and optimize parameters on huge clusters of their cloud facilities, and can get obvious advantage in this field. And here in Europe, this work on creating high-performance computing infrastructure accessible both for researchers and for industry and for SMEs is extremely important work, and also for sharing that infrastructure, because what we currently have to do, for example, in our company, to train machine translation systems to use cloud services, it's very expensive. We are buying GPUs, creating our own hardware, and what that creates, and I feel bad about that, because that is expensive from one side, but that also is very bad for environment, to create this carbon footprint, and we have to deal with extra heat and all the energy resources and on everything on that. And I know that somewhere at university there's a hardware infrastructure that is not used for these purposes, so we have to connect all these European servers and make them available for driving language technology, and in particular machine translation development, and to achieve this dream of real multilingual MT, being able to provide quality translation between any language directions.
Yeah. Andres?
Yeah, if I may, I would like to say that for us, it has been like an opportunity. I mean, we also lack this kind of resources that we need to train these large models, but we have associated with some universities that have the facilities. So we're establishing those links meanwhile, while we get our infrastructure ready. But the subject of infrastructure is not only a problem of the providers, but also of the customers. They want the technology, but when you ask them if they have the GPUs, they don't have them. So this is still something that we need to work on with them.
And maybe from our end, we're now part of a large defense company that has very different capabilities than from the SME times before. Now, one of the things we can do is, they've been very active in the area of vision, and basically the hardware that you need can be reused. So one of the things we're doing is we're trying to reuse the time on a server farm between vision and speech training, for example. So to team up. I mean, this was a coincidence in our case, but I think it's also a good way of teaming up, because normally you don't need the computing resources 7x24 a whole year. And the second thing, and this is going back to a remark that I made yesterday, I was kind of wondering if the current revolution in transformers attention, getting the squeezing out the last 0.whatever% to get a paper. And this is why students are working on this and theses are being done in that field, which is good, is really worth it. But if it's somehow blocking other developments, because everybody is so, I would almost say, paralyzed, so focused on the current approaches and pushing things a little further. One thing that I'd like to add is it's very interesting to get a significant result of 0.3%, but from speech recognition in the wild, I can tell you that customers sometimes don't feel 10% absolute.
I wouldn't notice, yeah. I'd like to move on towards the implications for society, and keeping in mind that well, first of all, I'd like to quote from the white paper series of the Metanape series 10 years ago, with the analogy with printing press when it was introduced that regional and minority languages across Europe fell behind. Oh, sorry, Martin. We need to give you a bell. You can interrupt.
Yeah, just wanted to come back again to data spaces and the energy efficiency in data management. First of all, it's very nice. You find it in a lot of programs now, that energy efficiency is an important thing. And this is exactly what a data space or data space can also support, because what we speak there is about data trading and about data collaboration. And we can only not share the hardware, but we can share the algorithms or the models. And as Andres said, it's a lot of power needed to develop the models, but if we share the models, or if you can reuse and use a model, then you don't need that computer power. And the data space can also provide services to slice and dice the parts of the data that you need. So you don't have to take the whole data bunch and you don't have to do everything by yourself. It's about a collaboration exercise here.
Exactly, coordination and cooperation. And I think that falls in line with this idea where we're trying to, as a European community, address this risk of digital extinction. And so that analogy with losing minority and regional languages through the printing press, and there's a very real risk that if technology is not there for our languages, that those languages will be left behind. And I'd like to move on to this idea of Digital Society Readiness Index. So that's when a country is digitally ready. And really what we're asking, are these languages digitally ready? And maybe could ask you, Andrej, in terms of your experience in Latvia with the in industry, is the Latvian language digitally ready?
Yeah, when you know, European countries are compared by using this DESI index, how good, how prepared they are to use digital technologies. And what we do see that in Latvia, in particular, this index is lowered because of low digital skills. And when we ask people, why do you do not use digital tools, digital services? Why do you not promote your products outside outside Latvia? We say, oh, yeah, because these skills are not, these tools, these products, these services are not available in our language, and there are plenty of information and courses how you can use these tools, but they are also not available in our language. And here we do see a tremendous potential of technologies like machine translation to make services multilingual so that companies can use and benefit from these services, and people can for example, small company and the persons who are doing some homework stuff can promote their stuff to the global audience. And for this machine translation can be extremely helpful tool. But when we also do see a need to show people how to apply technologies in crisis situation, how we can use these technologies to get information. Like during pandemic time, government regulations were changing all the time, and if people are in other country in the situation where they do not understand
Providing
what
access,
they can do,
yeah.
how can they, what they are allowed to do, what are regulations, how they can find help and support. Yeah, these tools are indispensable in this situation.
Exactly.
And with the war in Ukraine, Russia aggression in Ukraine, we do see how helpful are these tools.
And yeah, and
for
those machine
refugees.
translation systems that were
Yeah.
built overnight, basically, for
Yeah.
Ukrainian, when there's coordination, when there's motivation, when there's support push,
And
it can be done in a
community,
week, really.
research,
Yeah.
industry, community, European Commission, e-translation provided Ukrainian
Exactly.
machine translation. We developed an MT for our language group for
Yeah.
Ukrainian. In Czech Republic, Prague University did that. And that's showing how our community can very efficiently, in a short time, address
Absolutely.
critical societal needs.
And if we flip it around, we say, in the absence of this technology, you're left with marginalization. And I just want to quickly touch on marginalized communities, maybe through bias in data, say, for example, in NLP systems, Andres, if you could talk about that.
Well, in this respect, one of the main applications of text analytics tools is, for example, in mortgage applications or insurance policy evaluation, or even for career recommendation. So if we learn a model based on data with bias, for example, for marginalized populations or on racial basis or things like that, actually the prediction of these models are going to be also biased. So we have to be very careful with the quality of the data that we use for training the models.
And it could be perpetuated then. And so,
Exactly.
and similarly with speech technologies, when the technology doesn't, for example, recognize the voice of the elderly, we have marginalized community, right? We don't have, or accented speakers, yeah.
Absolutely. For example, non-native English, as is the case for most of us here on stage right now, but also different language registers. I think the speech technologies go from production to reception. I was really surprised actually by how widespread what the portfolio is. It goes also into the paralinguistic area, how we express emotions, for example. But that's a different topic. But special needs, for example, is something that has come up. I also mentioned the work on brain waves, brain activity to text maybe, or to action even. I think this is really a long-term, very interesting area where we could work together with neuroscience, for example. But this has come up, special needs also, different age groups, and also reaching out to, say, rural, more rural than urban population, not so tech-savvy population, using some sort of a smart device, conversational agent, maybe a personal assistant, helping with everything from medication. I think you brought that up as well. And also all the way to text-to-speech, where people who have lost their voice in a personalized manner could actually regain their voice. Right. And somebody who also, sorry, just one more thing, who contributed to our work, working for the Austrian Academy of Sciences, created a text-to-speech model of an actor who had died, and is actually being performed in one of the theaters in Vienna, is where he's speaking things that he never said, and you can hear him and experience him without him being around still.
So on that flip side, if we consider we have a subset of the population who can benefit from synthetic voices because they're losing their own voices based on the languages that they speak. So that we need to be able to switch it around and see where are the gaps and how our communities being marginalized and where people being left out. Okay, so I'm just going to come back to Vienna here to Martin. I'm going to bring you back in for one last comment. What would you like the audience to go away with as a main key from your deep dive?
Thank you very much. I think it was mentioned before, we call it semantic AI. So I think we have to mix in the data area, the symbolic AI and the machine learning and that stuff, deep learning. What does it mean? We need domain-specific vocabularies and knowledge graphs. And by doing this and really taking this into account, I think we can do powerful solutions and provide such data then for the others on the stage to do this solution. Thank you.
Okay, Gerhard, final statement.
Final statement. Well, we said before also accuracy is still the number one and thing that people complain. It's been like that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever. Maybe we should also rethink a little bit evaluation, and maybe we should also agree on that it doesn't have to be perfect to make perfect sense, and take a risk sometimes and not wait until it's perfect, but go out there and get it to the end users, because I'm sure even though it may not be perfect, it's going to help a lot of people.
Sure. And as native speakers, we make mistakes ourselves. So a computer should be allowed to make the mistake. Andres?
Okay, in my case, I would like to highlight that actually we're living in an age where we're suffering this paradigm shift from the symbolic model of the world towards this new paradigm of based on data, basically. And I would like to say that despite all the hype, there is a lot of research and development to do, because these models still suffer of many, many different weaknesses, and we need to solve them in order to make them useful for the enterprises and the customers.
Yeah. I believe that technologies like machine translation can really crash and remove language barriers in Europe. But for that, we cannot rely on technologies coming from global companies residing in states. But we need to develop rich European language technology infrastructure where industry plays an indispensable role, understanding user needs, transferring know-how from research into production applications, tailored and customized to particular needs of individual users, customers, or user groups.
Great. Okay, I think we're cutting into the next session already. So we might, if you have any questions, there will be a discussion after the next session, and you can obviously bring them up then, or feel free to approach the panelists at the break time. So maybe we could give a round